I'm really excited to be speaking to David Ranby today. David now co-owns a company called Braid Consulting. David, welcome to the channel.
Hi, David. Thank you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Let's just start off. Perhaps you could just introduce Braid Consulting and what you do there before we commence with the interview.
Yeah, sure. Braid has been around for about, we're in our 10th year of trading. Just two of us. I deal very much with the strategy, marketing side of things. My colleague, Brian Scher, deals with the technical background and technical project management. We've evolved as an agency from looking at general marketing strategy for businesses into rather more dedicated strategy, which then leads to project definition, which then leads to project delivery. So we're frequently brought in by businesses, first of all, to run audits, to look at what they're doing strategically in the digital space, and then to develop initiatives from there and then project manage the initiatives. And typically the businesses that involve us are those that have all the standard departments and such forth within the business, but don't necessarily have a depth of experience in digital strategy, digital marketing, or in project management, certainly complex project management. And so we get brought in on that basis, and frequently we'll end up working with clients for quite extended periods in order to really embed the strategy and pass on knowledge to the organisation so that they in turn can keep the strategy running without recourse to third parties, which of course are always going to be expensive no matter which way you cut it, unfortunately.
Yeah. So when you go into a company, something that strikes me when I've been doing work as a photographer and creating content is that the digital channels or the social channels are actually generally looked after by someone relatively young, certainly far younger than any other sort of head of department. And I wonder if this is because the directors are perhaps more our age and don't understand digital. They're not digital natives. Would that be your experience?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's true that the people who are at the coalface and managing directly the projects tend to be, relatively speaking, young and early into their business careers. Typically, and this isn't always the case, but typically the organisations that have got problems stem from the fact that the juniors they don't have a voice at the senior table. Number one, and that the senior table don't necessarily understand or know how to ask the right questions of the juniors. And so when we get into our audits, frequently there is an issue of communication and comprehension between poor communication going upstream from juniors who are learning about that sort of thing, and poor understanding coming down from the seniors because they've not imbued themselves with the sort of digital knowledge that they need to be able to analyse and understand what they're being told.
Sure. So what sort of communications are they lacking in? Is it in the process, the budgets required, the team members needed to actually facilitate a proper digital marketing strategy?
Budgets certainly become a problem because they're not then translated back to what is delivered. And the typical problem is that the reporting methodologies within the business is poor. And it's poor in two senses. One is that a lot of data is sent upstream. And blank data is fine, but if it's not given in a trend format and if it's not supplied with explanation as to what's generated that result, what could be done better or what's going wrong and what the next action should be to correct or improve on. If that communication doesn't go upstream, then you're giving data to a senior group who will take one look. It might only get 5 minutes at a board, and they're being asked to interpret something that they're being given no translation of. So a great deal of the problems that we come across when we do our audits is to do with that point of reporting. And critically, the reporting fails because it doesn't state what the situation is, whether it's good or bad. It doesn't state what the action should be, what the learnings are from that, good or bad. And it doesn't say what the next step is going to be from that data.
So, I mean, learning is what we're all about here at Business Questions. What are typical things that you find in companies that they're doing wrong within their digital strategy?
Your sound just dropped out there, but in terms of typical errors, they're not using the available tools and building up trend data. So they're not using Google Analytics to build up trends of what their users are doing and have been doing. They very frequently make the mistake of just comparing week on week or month on month, which in most businesses is quite dangerous because there will be annual trends that are more important to track. So year on year is much more relevant. Taking an e-commerce business and comparing January data to December is pretty pointless, frankly, unless they've got a huge sale. And equally, if you're looking at travel businesses, they are extremely cyclical as well. We have worked in travel and in house building a lot. There are certain cycles that take place that mean the typical week on week, month on month reporting is just pointless, and you learn nothing from it.
And are you also giving them advice on SEO strategy?
SEO comes into it. We look at the whole acquisition strategy and we look at all of the acquisition activity. And this is where one of the sort of major elements of any audit of your digital activity should focus, which is on your suppliers and understanding what you're being told. Suppliers, typically marketing agencies and web development firms, will often try and pigeonhole their clients into what suits them or what they found has worked in the past. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that your product and your messages are being pushed into a methodology and into a system that maybe is not suited to you. So your first audit approach has to look at all of your acquisition activity and whether or not it's fit for purpose, whether or not it is delivering good value. So again, back to your reporting, are you actually looking carefully at what the return is and not just looking at it from a vanity point of view because, oh, look, we've got loads of visitors or whatever it might be. But equally then looking at what the best practice situations are. So, for example, we've been dealing with about 8 different agencies in the last 9 months, major agencies who are communicating monthly to their clients as to what they've been delivering for their clients. And none of them have mentioned Core Web Vitals, and none of them have mentioned the forthcoming iOS cookie blocking situation. And to me, that is a real fundamental error because they're not warning clients of 2 critical issues that are going to affect their digital business in the not just short, but medium and long term. Yeah. And so there's an example of where when we undertake audits, we're really looking for the complete picture to see whether or not the third parties are providing value for money, but also ensuring that they're providing absolute best practice for their clients.
When I may be wrong, I mean, something I do find resistance for when I'm speaking to companies about provision of SEO is that they don't wish to create the content, the agencies. And yep. I think the agencies are great. They can do the technical side of things, but they need the content from the actual company, because for me, the authenticity is lost without that. And then you also see that the company is not willing to repurpose the content they've created. And yeah, it drives me absolutely crazy. And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how SEO works, I think, and how you can, redistribute content in small snippets and bites throughout various other channels. And that, I mean, it comes down to communication again.
It comes down to communication. It comes down to an understanding within the business that they have got to actually tell stories, and they've got to give stories to their customers. And a lot of businesses that struggle in digital seem to think they have that 1950s attitude of we make this nail, do you want to buy it? And that's it. And that still seems to exist, sadly. Whereas the more forward-thinking companies recognize that there's a value in telling stories, engaging customers with stories about their business, their products, and engaging with the customers in terms of the issues that the customers have got that leads them to use that product. And you can apply that theory across B2B, B2C, anything you like. That methodology applies. So a forward-thinking company will want to tell stories, number one. Number two, they'll recognize that they are the experts and they should be the people who manage and curate their storytelling and their customer engagement. And we get quite annoyed with businesses that don't recognize the need for that communication. But I suppose the final point is we can quite quickly show how little value there is in the third-party content generated by agencies, because unfortunately the agencies, not entirely their fault, do not know their clients' stories well enough, or don't know the nuances of the issues well enough to be able to create something that's engaging and that will have a long-term benefit. And we see this frequently. But I think you can still ally this problem right back to reporting, because if SEO isn't reported based on its impact on commercial benefit, and by that you're looking at attribution that shows the organic traffic does eventually turn into direct, which turns into the lead or the sale or inquiry or whatever. If you're not doing that reporting, then you've completely compartmentalized this content and SEO as just, oh, it's fussy stuff, who cares? It's not about actual sales. And we come across that in so many businesses. It is quite scary, actually, when I think that I was dealing with those sorts of issues in 1999 with hotel groups. And yet they're still, even after 20 years of new people being educated and then coming into work and then being made, senior marketing managers, they still don't seem to carry this basic knowledge and understanding of reporting and translation of the different routes of communication that are needed to make up the whole marketing mix.
Yeah, so powerful. And I think, a lot of people say, we haven't got, especially in perhaps smaller companies, we haven't got the time to write down. We're not writers, we're not journalists. And I just always say to them, look, you haven't got to be. You've got a telephone, it's got a voice recorder, speak it. Get your passion into your voice recorder. If you're on a journey in the car park waiting for the train, just chat in there for 1 minute or 2 minutes. That can then be transcribed, and you've created content. But and you still get put up against a wall, almost. And it's no benefit to me if they do it or not. I'm not doing SEO, just advising them on what they could do to help themselves. But they carry on doing what they've always done and getting the same results and being left behind, sadly.
And that point you make, just to add to that, it actually underlines a really key failure in businesses, in that they don't have a process for ideation, and therefore they're not encouraging that creative thinking, which leads to the content generation. And if businesses can build in a methodology and build in time to discuss and generate ideas, which in turn can then create that content, then they'll get value, then they'll get quality. But too many businesses seem to fail to create that environment for creativity.
Yeah, and I see this again all the time, and it just annoys me so much in my uh, photography career. I do some product, photography, and it's like it's another boring flat lay, and it's so unbelievably boring. It's like you've got all these customers. Why aren't we out interviewing the customers? Because that's on your feed. They're going to post it on their feed. It's just going to, the outreach is so much expanded. But oh no, let's create a pretty flat lay. And yeah, it's very frustrating as a marketeer that people just don't embrace what's available to them or don't really understand how important it is. But when you go into a companies and you're looking at their, so you're doing digital audit, what other sort of things are you looking for? Are you advising on how they, because it's all right, yeah, in using this, you can have a picture on Instagram, but is that effective? Are you advising on how best to utilize each platform?
Yeah, the audit would encompass looking at all the areas that they're active, whether or not those areas are delivering any value, whether or not they're actually working in those areas effectively, because you do see plenty of companies that think they're doing really well on Pinterest or Facebook, and they're doing it appallingly, and actually in some cases doing damage to their brand. So we do review everything they're currently doing. We also audit what they're missing. We look at their competitors and what spaces they're playing in, and we try and find that ground in the middle that says you're doing really well with these, focus here. You're not doing enough here, do more on this. And there's a big gap here that nobody's playing in that you need to do more. And that can frequently sit in certain types of paid advertising. It can frequently sit in certain social areas as well. So we do look at the whole mix and try and take as pragmatic a view. And again, it all comes back to reporting. Take a pragmatic view as to what is contributing to the overall strategic success. And the thing that we look for the most is we look for the vanity projects, the ones that really seemingly have no business basis for existing or being supported, but it turns out they are the favorite projects of somebody senior, and that's why it's being done. And we do find ourselves frequently in a position where we are providing our final audit reports and pointing out that X, Y, or Z really isn't worth pursuing, which sometimes is what the middle and junior managers wanted to say. They've just never been in a position to say it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. You haven't got perhaps an open door policy where those middle managers, they're frightened.
Yeah.
Can't put their ideas, out there, which is such a shame, because often they're also the ones more on the front line that can actually see what's happening. And they're probably in a broader sense of the business, they're the ones actually speaking to the customers or getting that feedback from their sales and marketing teams, and just not getting, hey boss, you're doing this wrong.
And on the back of those audit levels of looking at the strategy, looking at how their distribution is working, how their acquisition is delivering at what value, we're also looking at what are the necessities to be added in, which might be third-party skills in SEO, or it might be third-party skills in development areas, but also looking very much at what the training is needed. And we tend to try not to talk about training. We try and talk about just developing greater skills or developing greater knowledge. And we try and look at that, not just at the juniors. We try and equally pass that up the line to point out, if necessary, at a board level, look, you're deficient in these areas, you need to go and find out more about it. Have a look at these courses, have a look at these articles and such forth. So we try and take as holistic a view as to what all the influences are that will ensure a company can reach a practical digital strategy. I guess that's in a sense where some of our reports come out. We do tend to take as practical an approach as possible, keep things in short sentences, use small words, make it consumable, put calendars on there of all the steps that they need to take, give them a red, amber, green so that it's really clear what they need to do. Because I think too often third parties, consultants will deliver massive tomes of reports that probably in the good old days sat in the bottom drawer, and in these days sits somewhere in a huge email directory and only get read once and never referred to again. And what we're trying to do is make sure that it's what we're delivering is practical and does lead to change.
I mean, for a normal company, do you advise on, the optimum amount of channels you should be on? Because some people try and be on every single digital platform, but actually, for business questions, then fundamentally we go on LinkedIn and Twitter, and they're the main ones. Obviously, YouTube as well, because Instagram not really our thing, Pinterest not really our thing, but I'm not trying to be on there. Do you find that people aren't focused enough on their digital channels?
Yeah, they're not focused as to which ones are appropriate, which ones are actually that they've tested to see generate an engagement, and they're not measuring. And I think the final one is which ones give them a space that gives them an audience they need to talk to. And businesses do tend to try and approach what they think are different audiences on different channels, and don't recognize that we're all consuming multiple channels. You don't have to be on all of them, because that just means I get exposed to your message 5 times as opposed to once. It's more relevant that you deliver that one message through the one platform that's appropriate to you in the most effective and creative method. It's not that you've just thrown as many things at the wall and see what's stuck, which, yes, plenty of businesses try and do far too much of that. And you can see that approach not just in, say, their use of social, but in their advertising methodologies, and in all of their, if you like, non-digital marcoms. Businesses still producing brochures but not having distribution plans for them, producing really fancy PDFs but absolutely no idea of how anyone's going to get hold of them because it's too big to email and too big to download. Just basic fundamental errors like that.
And for me, I think that for every business, apps are going to be the way forward, because websites are perhaps becoming increasingly, they're important because of Google and getting the snippets at the top and providing that information. But I just think that apps are going to be taking over, and every company, when it becomes affordable, is going to have an app, and they can control their digital presence from that. What would your thoughts be? Am I talking nonsense, or are websites really going to start having a decline?
I don't think websites are going to decline, because I think the willingness to have multiple apps on any device is shrinking already. And I think people's appetite to have multiple apps has shrunk somewhat. It's a bit like the old stereos back in the day, which had 50 buttons on them, and pretty much the quality of the stereo was based on the number of buttons. Yeah. However, once you bought the thing, within about 2 months, your usage of those 50 buttons had narrowed to about 4 of them and remained at that. And apps, I think, are going through exactly the same thing. People will download 50 apps onto their phone. They'll only use 4 or 5 of them after a few months. But
is it that sort apps, of those sorry to interrupt. Is it those sort of those the big fans which will actually have the apps, the ones which are actually buying and most important to you, and the ones you actually really want to communicate? Your super fans. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, the apps which devolve a benefit from regular usage are fine. The apps that are one way, that are passive sellers, are always going to be very difficult to be successful unless there is a frequency of consumption that demands that you keep using it. So, for example, I use Runkeeper every day when I'm out cycling or walking, whatever. That's great. I need it. But I've got the John Lewis app. I maybe only buy from them a couple of times a year. I'm not going to use the app. I'm going to go to the website because I want a bigger image, a more luxurious experience via a big screen. And I think that there are horses for courses in that regard. And I think apps have got, not necessarily a narrow, but they've certainly got a confined niche in terms of their acceptability to the general population.
Yeah.
And the final point, of course, is practically speaking, companies are beginning to realize that websites are a great deal cheaper to maintain than an app.
Yeah, I think this is half the problem. I'd love an app, but the price is just unaffordable. Currently at the stage we're at, which is hugely frustrating. I know you can do it yourself, obviously, the learning to code, etc. I just haven't got time to do that at the
But
moment.
you just said you'd love an app. That's maybe the vanity side of it. It's not whether you love it; it's whether your users would love it.
Well, I think in terms of business questions, it's how people would actually consume the videos that we are producing. If you've got the app there, it's on your screen, great. What's David uploaded today, and it's right there, as opposed to going to YouTube, finding the channel, website, finding the new ones. To have it just push forward into the actual app, all the new content for our sort of super fans would be a very desirable thing. It's something that I would certainly like to use, and I know I use apps far more frequently than I go onto websites. I know what I like. I think it's like watching a TV shows, isn't it? You have the shows you want to watch and those you don't. Sometimes you browse through Netflix. That's a minimal part. Mostly it's actually the series I have chosen to watch. I want to stick with those. But that's
But
a whole.
equally, when you look at a model like Netflix, they are pushing their content via more traditional methods of email and even advertising, in order that then springboards you into accessing them by whichever mode you like, be it on a laptop, be it on your visual TV or on your handheld. They're still utilizing ordinary push methodologies to get you to consume it. So the app itself only performs a function in terms of whether that's the consumption method the person wants. It's not the communication method.
Oh, so it's interesting. I obviously unsubscribe from all their emails. I find new shows via what is recommended to me via them in app only. I never have an email from them at
Okay.
all. So we get so many emails, don't we? I just unsubscribe.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on about where people are actually doing harm to their business via their social sort of output. Can you give any examples of that? I know it's sort of putting you on the spot, but I think it's great to actually learn from mistakes. You haven't got no company names, by the way, just what they.
Yeah, I think the obvious ones are when there are customer complaints that are directly loaded into, say, Facebook, for example. We've seen this on a few occasions, and the treatment of those complaints are based upon agency-driven automated responses. And it's in that situation where you really want to tell the company that they shouldn't be in that environment if they're not going to deal with the communication directly. And we have dealt with a number of businesses who have relied on agency management of their Facebook channels, which then results in a very extended complaint process, which by its very nature, every step you have to go through is going to exacerbate your frustration with the lack of answers. So we've seen that on a number of occasions.
What about do you advise on building communities, say on Facebook groups? Is that something you get involved in?
Not in depth, no. It is part of the general mix audit. It is part of the considerations and whether or not that's going to have an impact and whether it's an appropriate element to the product. But no, I think we look at ourselves as we're looking at an overall practical strategy. We're not trying to claim to be the piano tuner and getting things absolutely perfect.
Okay. Any sort of final golden nuggets of advice you could give anyone on their digital strategy?
Demand of any agency what's gone wrong, what can we learn from it, and what's the next step. The second thing is always tell the agency the mistakes are fine so long as we learn and improve from them. Far too often, the clients expect brilliance 100%. That's impractical. That simply isn't going to happen. And I think you need to measure, report, but look at trends, because far too frequently people are looking at single numbers, and look for the trends in data. So if I wanted to pull it right down to one very simple point, look at a graph, don't look at a table.
Very, very sound advice. Thank you so much, David, for your time here. Really, really is appreciated. I'll put your website details in the description below, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you, David. That's been really good fun. Thank you. Best of luck.